Coming up tonight, the Symphony of the Seas gets her very first breather at this sailing as we make our first stop. We return to the 80s, and we sit down with the captain. It's all coming up, so let's set sail. Welcome to day number 4 of the cruise view from onboard the Symphony of the Seas. Today was Tuesday, December 4th, 2018, and our location was St. Maarten, the first port of call on this 7-night sailing. We were originally scheduled for an 8 a.m. arrival, and according to the compass, it was oddly listed as 8 a.m. arrival with an estimate of 8:30 immediately written after it. But this morning, I got up at 7 a.m. to get ready for that arrival, and we're already turning around and pulling into port by 7:10. We were already docked, so we were far earlier than our scheduled arrival this morning. This evening, we departed at 5:45. The all aboard was 5:30 with a scheduled departure of 6 o'clock. 5:45, everybody was on board, and we took off by about 6:10. We were well out to sea again and beyond the limits of the island. We're not alone today, but we were not packed in like sardines either. It is St. Maarten, but today we had a very rare light load in port today. We were one of just 2 ships. The Norwegian Dawn visited as well today with an 8 a.m. arrival, and she left at 4 o'clock, just about when the sun was setting, giving a beautiful sight as she sailed away. And for the rest of the weather today, we had a sunrise at 5:30 a.m. this morning, and that sunset, as I mentioned, came just after the dawn's departure at 4:35 p.m. We had a listed high of 80 degrees today, but it felt significantly warm. It was a very hot day out today. At least the sun felt very hot. And it was sunny with a little bit of cloud cover. This morning, just after we arrived, there was a storm that passed through. It did not touch the ship or the port itself, but you could see the downpours coming over the mountain, and it passed across the other side of the bay. So we were spared from it, but I'm sure some people on excursions might have gotten hit by it a little bit. Overall, we had calm winds today and calm seas as well. We had, of course, those rougher seas last night, but today things have calmed down significantly. So moving on to our compass then. This morning, we, of course, arrived in St. Maarten. That meant that it was a very light selection of activities for the day. For me, at least, I spent most of the day on board here filming different areas of the ship, but I did step off from 10:30 to 12:30. And it was, as I mentioned, incredibly hot in the port. Everybody was complaining about just how hot it was today. It was an unusually warm sun out today. And walking around the port, it's interesting to compare it to last week. Of course, we only had 2 ships in port today. Last week we had 6 ships in port. But the actual port area did not feel all that different in crowd size. It might have just been the timing of when I came off the ship last week. It was around the time that ships were starting to get ready to depart. But it was a pretty empty port today, for sure. And it wasn't just the port that was empty. Back on board the ship, it was empty as well. The pool deck did get a little bit of crowd at each individual pool. Not a full crowd or even a partial crowd, just a couple people at every pool spread out around the deck. And in the lower levels, like the promenade here, it was pretty well empty throughout the entire day. Even lower down on deck number 4 was completely deserted because the casino, of course, is closed and there were no activities and entertainment place to go to. So that basically filled up my entire day. And we departed, as I mentioned, at 5:45, which meant it interfered with the dinner tonight. So instead of heading to the main dining room tonight, I did go to the Windjammer once again. And tonight is not quite as good as last time. It was a different menu than what was in the main dining room. which is unfortunate because tonight I was hoping to catch one of those items from the main dining room in there. They did have some chicken parmesan in the dining room, but that was not up in the Windjammer. Same with they had a soup in the main dining room, but the one up in the Windjammer is actually a soup that's supposed to be served tomorrow night in the main dining room. So it did not match or overlap at all tonight. But one area that it did exceed the main dining room for sure was in the desserts. Unlike Anthem, which had that huge pie and cake selection, they had a very large selection of tiny little hors d'oeuvre-like desserts. Little bites. They had things like red velvet whoopie pies, very elegant looking eclairs. They had little mini cheesecakes, strawberry tarts, all kinds of desserts up there today that were just more elaborate and fancier looking than we usually see in a Windjammer, and even would be considered elaborate for a main dining room dessert as well. So that was a nice little treat there. In addition to the actual desserts, they had some very fancy and complex chocolate sculptures up there as well tonight. But after dinner, that was when my night really started to get going. We had a whole bunch of entertainment items to line up today. They pretty much covered the gamut of what's on board here. At 8:30 tonight it started in Studio B with the first showing of iSkate 2.0. iSkate 2.0, of course, is the sequel to iSkate from the Harmony of the Seas. And it's similar in concept, but very different in execution. iSkate 1.0, of course, on the Harmony of the Seas was designed to sort of showcase the talent that is on this ship. It is designed to let everybody show a little bit of their own personality. Basically was an iPod shuffling through different songs that were picked by the ice skaters and allowed them to perform routines of varying styles depending on what they personally prefer to perform. iSkate 2.0, on the other hand, didn't use an iPod. It actually used a DJ with some records, so it still had a similar concept with the music, but it was a much looser one. It wasn't as ingrained in the concept and the graphics like it was in iSkate 1.0. iSkate 2.0, on the other hand, had a lot more textual graphics and visual graphics on the ice that went along with the music rather than just to progress the story along like we saw in 1.0. And similar to 1977, they had projections going pretty much the entire show in iSkate 2.0, just compared to just a couple scenes like we saw in the iSkate 1.0. And I personally found iSkate 2.0 to actually be a bit better than 1.0. And to me, as I mentioned the other night, each show can affect people in different ways. Doesn't matter how technical or complex a show it is. iSkate 2.0 actually seemed a little more enjoyable than the main show, 1977, for me at least. It was definitely not as technical or complex. It did not have as cool a visual to it. It didn't have a blizzard or drones or anything to it. It was just basic standard figure skating. But the moves that were used, the way that they were executed, the nice variety from the very classical performance to the very edgy rock performances. It was just an all-around, very well-rounded show with a lot of different variety to it. And there's one scene that is probably one of the coolest scenes I've seen in terms of pure figure skating on board a ship. And that was a scene, pretty much one of the last moments of the show, in the closing routine when the entire cast on the ice, they actually have 3 headbangers performed at the exact same time. And it is absolutely incredible to see anytime they do one of those. So to have 3 of them at the exact same time right there in complete unison is just absolutely incredible to see. And that is probably, as I mentioned, one of the coolest things I've seen of any ice show on board a ship up to this point. And the other thing that was really neat about it was the opening scene of the show is completely unlike anything else that we see on this ship or Harmony or really anything Nick Weir has created recently. It is almost the anti-Nick Weir opening scene. It is the most simplistic and just incredibly beautiful opening sequence of a show. It just features the cast in black outfits, no over-the-top graphics, just the cast, very subtle, basic white lights, black ice, beautiful music going and just a very elegant performance to start the show. And it is an absolutely moving sequence that is really surprising just how powerful it is, considering how simple it is compared to the rest of the stuff we see on this ship. So that was 8:30. It lasted about 30-35 minutes, and at 8:45 in the Aqua Theater they had another performance of Hiro. So the moment that ended, as I often do, I try to see as many shows as I possibly can. I ran across the ship, caught about the last 20 minutes of Hiro, saw that from the back. Once again, an absolutely incredible show. Still going to go see it tomorrow for the full thing with an actual seat, because I did not get to sit down low for that show yet since our performance was canceled. But I caught the very end of it from the back of the theater, and as I mentioned, that is an incredible show. And once that was over, I then was running back across the ship to just about here, right on the other side of the promenade, for the big 80s dance party in the Royal Promenade. And this, of course, is the big party on board the ship. We've had 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. Now we're going back to the 80s on board the Symphony of the Seas. The 90s, of course, was a very scripted performance, much more scripted than we see of most parties. That was the one on board the Harmony of the Seas, and it was entirely the activities staff and cruise director staff that performed that. With the 80s, they've kind of simplified things and progressed them. Instead of an overly complex script, there's a very light one, and it is very loose and mainly just the music. There's very little actual light involvement, which surprised me, because that's usually a big part of these shows, is the lighting of the ceiling or the atrium wherever the party takes place, and it really has an impact on it. There wasn't a whole lot of that involved in today's show, but the big moment was the opening, where for the first time that I've seen in one of these parties, they actually had the Royal Caribbean production cast come out and do a performance to kick the show off. So instead of just going right into the party, you had the pre-party with a DJ over here on the Rising Tides bar. Then you had the production cast come out and put on a performance to get everybody in the 80s mood. And then the cruise director staff and activity staff came out to put on the true 80s party. So that lasted about 45 minutes till roughly 10:45. So after that, 10:30 was another iSkate 2.0, so I headed back down there, caught the last about 15 minutes of that show. And once again, then there was a 10:45 Hiro, so I ran across the ship, caught the last 25 minutes of that one, before heading up to the top deck to the solarium where they had the white party at 11 o'clock. And as I mentioned, it was an incredibly hot day today, and tonight it is still an incredibly hot night. So that party, there was a small crowd there, not too big. In the past, I've checked out the white party, and it's always seemed to be a small crowd, but it's typically because it's windy or uncomfortable out there. Tonight, there was no wind. It was a very comfortable environment out there, except that heat is still around, and so it was still very hot up there. And for all the people that were dancing, that was certainly a very hot environment to try and have a nightclub in. So I think that kind of turned some people away. A lot of people seem to show up for a few minutes and then leave. But as Royal Caribbean typically does, that was fully taking over the solarium. They locked off one side of the solarium, had you go through just the port side entrance solarium so that they could check every single SeaPass card to ensure only those over 18 could get into the event. So, not sure how late that went. I only stuck around until just after midnight and then left. But that was about the last event to happen tonight. And after that, then, we do not have any venue or dining tours today, but we do have an interview. Today, we had our very first port of call. We had that visit to St. Maarten, and of course, that is one of those ports with a nice 180-degree spin to get into the pier and dock ourselves. So today, I got to sit down with Captain Rob up in the bridge to find out how he handles the Symphony of the Seas.
Please welcome the master of the Symphony of the Seas, Captain Rob!
Anyway, I'm very proud to be the captain on our beautiful Symphony of the Seas, our newest and largest. but we don't like to think of it as the largest in the world. We like to think of it as the greatest in the world.
Today I am up on the bridge, joined by Captain Rob. Thanks for joining me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Could you provide a little bit of background information on yourself?
Sure. Many times guests will ask, how did you get started? So it started for me and for many of us in the business of going to sea. It starts when we're young and we're exposed to it. And that was the case for me. So my dad was a captain, and I grew up with it. I was the youngest of four, and I got to see my brother go to sea, and even my sisters at times, because he was very good about taking us with him as much as he could. So I made my first trip when I was 12, and I remember being deathly seasick, and it was quite an exciting time. I had always wanted to go. Seeing my brother go with him and come back and with a tan and lots of stories, I just, always wanted to go. So it was a strong desire of mine always, since I can remember. And anyway, through high school, I made a number of trips with my dad, to the point where probably 20% of my time was spent at sea. I would take my studies with me, get permission, of course, from the principal, and take my exams when I came home. And I always did better when I went away, so I was able to keep doing it. And after high school, I went to the Merchant Marine Academy in California. And when you go into the academy as a young cadet, you have visions of working on tankers and cargo ships, container ships, and the like. And there was lots of opportunity when I went into school. But by the time I graduated in 1986, things had changed a lot, and there wasn't a lot of opportunity, at least in the areas of tank ships and container ships. So I made my contacts on the West Coast, and I ended up fishing in Alaska. I fished for 14 years up in the Bering Sea on the big factory trawlers. And I was a captain for 10 years on those large ships, and they were large for fishing boats, if you will. They were actually small ships in the range between 300 and 380 feet. And we fished also in the Sea of Okhotsk in Russia, eastern western Bering Sea, North Pacific. We did some in Asia, and spent my last few years fishing over in West Africa, off the coast of Mauritania, and turning around in the Canary Islands. That was very interesting. Long story short, we were in partner with the Dutch. They sold the ship, and I was looking at going back to the Bering Sea or doing something else, and that was in 1999, late 1999. I knew somebody here at Royal Caribbean, so there was an opportunity, and I thought that at that point in my life I had to make a choice, whether to continue in the fishing, which is very specialized, or try something completely different. This intrigued me, and I had learned early on that you go where there's growth, and I knew that not only the amazing aspect of cruise ships in general, but that there was going to be opportunity as well. So I was willing to take that risk, that chance, and step back and start over again. So I did. And I saved my money when I was fishing, and I knew I was able to continue as a junior officer. As long as I could make promotions at a certain rate, I could continue. So when I first came to Royal Caribbean in 1999, I stepped aboard the Grandeur of the Seas in San Juan, and I'll never forget it. She was a new ship, more or less, back then, and she was big. And now it's one of our small ships. When I started with Royal Caribbean as a second officer, I did one contract as a second officer, and then I was promoted to first officer. Did some time as first officer. I went through all the ranks, from first officer to chief officer to safety officer to staff captain, and finally captain. And I've been a captain now for going on 14 years. I've been with the company starting my 20th year, and it's been amazing. And when we started, we had 10 ships, and now we have 25. And soon to be 26 and 27, and we're building one ship a year for the next 10 years within the Royal Caribbean brand. So it's been lots of opportunity. It's been an amazing experience. When I started on the Grandeur of the Seas as a young guy, a young officer, I was amazed at the complexity of the operation, that there was so many aspects to it that officers in this business are exposed to that you would never be exposed anywhere else. from public speaking to engineering, from the entertainment side of the business to the food and beverage side of it, to the housekeeping side of it, to the maintenance and the amazing structure of the ship itself and having an understanding of all the systems on board. Not to mention the active navigation. We're in and out of port almost every single day. On any given week, we call in at least 4, sometimes up to 6 ports in a 7-day cruise. We just completed our season in Europe on the Symphony of the Seas, and we were 6 ports in 7 days. So it's very active. I was seeing the world and seeing it through a different set of eyes. Mm-hmm. I really was amazed and intrigued, and I loved what I was doing. Really felt re-energized.
Yeah.
And it's been like that ever since. I have to say that I look forward to coming back to sea when I'm home on vacation. And you know, in the past it was, I have a knot in my stomach before coming back. You know, going fishing was high risk and it was hard in so many ways. Mm-hmm. And it's hardship all around. It was very challenging and very rewarding in a lot of ways too. You learn a lot of hard seamanship there. And I'm glad for that experience, but I needed to move on.
So the Symphony of the Seas is the world's largest cruise ship, the newest for Royal Caribbean. Mm-hmm. How did you get the honor of being her captain?
Well, I don't know. I guess I wanted to do it. They asked me to do it, mm-hmm. and we agreed. So it was an honor to be asked, and I had never taken out a new build for Royal Caribbean, of course, and this was an amazing challenge. Yeah. Doing so, also, though, there was an agreement that I was able to pick a number of the key people on the team to start the ship, and understanding the whole process of taking out a new build, being the takeout captain, being her first captain, and the commitment that involves. Mm-hmm. So when we came over, and we came over as a small group to Saint Nazaire, where she was built, Saint Nazaire, France. That was in November, and she wasn't going to be launched into service until the end of March. So we had a long ways to go. And when I joined Symphony of the Seas, she was not nearly ready for anything. She was unfinished in a huge way. So the process was that we had to keep track of the build process and make sure that we were on track to be finished. That involved a lot. We also had a lot of say in where things were going and how things were shaping up. So at some point we were able to give a lot of input, having known our lessons learned from other ships. I was captain on Oasis of the Seas before Symphony, so I knew the class of ship, and I knew some of the things that we could probably do differently here, maybe improve things. And so we were able to make some positive changes. You can never make all the changes you want. And when the company agrees with a shipyard to build a ship, they make a plan, and this is the plan, and you stick to the plan. And if you change the plan, now that's called a change order. Change orders get very expensive. So you have to kind of settle and agree on certain things.
Yeah. So you're an American captain. There are not many of you out there.
Correct.
How, as an American captain, has your path been more difficult or different than all the other captains out there?
I don't know. It's a good question. I have some advantages and some disadvantages. We are an international company, and we hire from all over the world. And so you could say that we're competing in a world market, not just, let's say, within the United States. Mm-hmm. So we like to think that we hire the best from all around the world, and at least we strive to do that. So to be a part of this organization and to be successful in it is a great honor, and therefore I meet the challenge with everything I have. So that's been the case. And for whatever reasons, they asked me to come to the beautiful Symphony, and I was more than happy to accept.
The Symphony is a huge ship with a ton of power. She can go 25 knots, but at the same time, last week I had the honor of seeing her in Nassau do a very quick 180-degree spin. How do you harness all that power to do those kinds of maneuvers?
Well, it takes a lot of practice. Also, you have to be careful when you use the power that we have. It's big equipment, big machinery, and you have to be careful with it. So although we have a lot of power, we only use what we need at the time. And sometimes we need a lot of power. If the wind is blowing and the current is strong, we need that power. That's not always the case, but she is highly maneuverable. We have the 3 ASI pods on the stern, 20 megawatt each, 10 megawatt each for maneuvering, and our 4 big bow thrusters, and they're 7,500 horsepower each, and they're quite effective. But they need water. They need water to operate in. So in shallow water, she's sensitive, very sensitive. It's sort of like driving on ice. When you have very little water under the hull in shallow port conditions and so forth, you can have all the power in the world. But if there's not enough water to give you the traction you need for thrust, she can be a big handful. So with a big ship like this, you have to be precise. She doesn't fit so well everywhere. And we have to get it perfectly right every time, because there's no room for error, if you will, or sloppiness. It has to be precise. And it takes practice and a lot of concentration, and it's very much a team effort on the bridge for maneuvering, so that whoever's doing the conning, the actual maneuvering, the controlling of the handles and the thrusters and the pods, that person is focused solely on that job and nothing else. And he has a whole support team around him. And when I say him or her, that's because I don't do all the maneuvers on the ship. I do the challenging ones, sure, but I probably do 35% of all the maneuvers that we do on a weekly basis. So training the staff captain and the chief officers to maneuver this ship as much as possible. So my role is coaching a lot of the time. And that's good, and I take a lot of effort in doing that, because it's my reward to see them successful. And I'm in a way paying it forward. For all those captains that I worked with over the years, I was very fortunate to have great mentors. And that taught me a lot, and I want to pay that forward to the young guys and girls coming up through the ranks.
So the ships continue to get larger, but a lot of times these larger ships actually seem more maneuverable than the small ones. How does the size of the ship relate to the maneuverability of it?
Well, that can be very true. Some of the small ships can be a real handful to handle. And I spent many years on the Vision class ships. And in a wind and in current, they can be quite a handful. They're traditional in their design. They're conventional, as we call them, propellers and rudders. And they have limited power and limited maneuverability with propellers and rudders versus the pods. So, but they are smaller, so you have a little bit of room to move, let's say, but it requires just as much effort and skill. It's just different on a bigger ship.
Yeah.
And like anything else, you have to practice. And it just requires a lot of focus and understanding of ship handling. So that's just the way it is.
So on most days, we get these nice blue skies, beautiful weather out here, but occasionally there are rainstorms that pop up all across the ocean, and you have to find a way to navigate through it. Yeah. With a ship that's typically on autopilot, just driving itself, how do you kind of change that course and ensure we don't get hit with those rainstorms?
Well, let me set the record straight as far as the ship driving itself. It never really does. There's a watch officers, first and second officers on duty 24 hours a day. Whether we're in port or at sea, it doesn't matter. So they're driving. They're utilizing the tools that we have to do so, but they're driving. And they're setting the parameters into the equipment. In this case would be the track pilot that maintains their track. So if you think the ship is heading this way, you have to remember that it's always slipping and sliding. There's always current and wind affecting our course, and our course over ground is always going to be different than our heading. So, and it's constantly changing. The current's changing and the wind's changing. So the ship is forever sliding around a little bit and changing, and that has to be adjusted for all the time. And that's done by the watch officer. And just because I'm on the bridge does not mean I have the con or have the navigational command. I always have the command of the ship, but my presence on the bridge, unless I declare it, is not to interfere with the navigation at that moment. I'm just passing through. My office opens up to the bridge. But that said, I'm always on call 24 hours a day. And at any time, I can take the navigational command of the ship if I feel the need. But they're all experienced guys and girls, and they know what they're doing, and yet I'm in communication with them every day, all of them, every day, many times throughout the day, and sometimes at night. So that's how we do it. We're never really not in control. Okay.
So leaving out of Florida, there are a lot of cruise ships in the area. The other night as we were sailing out, we had the Bliss on one side and the Majesty of the Seas on the other side. How do you coordinate with other ships to ensure that everybody's kind of keeping their own ground?
Well, we communicate with each other for sure, and that's a given. We schedule ourselves long way out. So we're planning our itineraries up to 2 years in advance. And we put them up for sale generally for 18 months. And that's a commitment. So we commit to that itinerary and we sell it accordingly. And at that point, it's set in stone. So we are negotiating with the ports early on for our space, our berth, and the timing of our arrivals and departures. There's a certain amount of flexibility that comes with that as we get closer in. Sometimes the itinerary has to be adjusted and so forth, but we always try to make sure that we don't have ships arriving at the same time. So we have to stagger ourselves, and that's an agreement that's made with the port. So the port's interest is taking care of the port and making sure all the ships that come and go are doing so safely, and that we don't have a free-for-all for the port. And this is where the captains and the port, they have to communicate and agree. And early on, that's done on a macro scale, let's say, but as we get closer in, it's really confirmed near the end. So if I see that, let's say for example, we're communicating with the port a few days before we get in, and I see that when they write back and say, okay, we have the following ships arriving, and these are the times, and I see, wow, we've got 2 ships arriving at the same time, you know, us being one of them. We have to figure this out. We can't just both show up there at the same time. So I usually get that clarified early on. That way we avoid any kind of conflict. Sometimes the ship has to do a maneuver before coming alongside the berth, and that takes a little extra time. Let's say we come into Nassau, and if we're going starboard side 2, we go straight in. If a ship that's arriving nearly at the same time has to do a turn and back in port side 2, for example, they're going to take more time, and I don't want to conflict with them. So I might say, look, it's better we go first because we can just go straight in. You can follow us in. If I have to do the turn, I'll say to them, please go first. You don't have to turn, we do. We'll hold you up if we do. Yeah. So that's sort of how we look at things, and that's just one example.
So out here in the middle of the ocean, it's not like the city streets where you've got roads and line markings to stay in. How does that get handled out here when you have multiple ships in the same small area?
Well, we refer to certain areas of the world as having shipping lanes. Now, they're not lanes per se, it's just that this is the shortest route between point A and point B. And there's a lot of ships that take that route. At sea, we follow what they call rules of the road, and that's a predetermined set of rules that's been in place for hundreds of years, and it's agreed on by IMO, which is part of the UN, and all the signatory countries that subscribe to that all agree to these standards. And these rules of the road, as they're referred to, are ingrained in us, and we're tested on it, and it's just part of our DNA. And so we pass and meet ships generally port to port. So that's an agreed upon, that's a known way of navigating and meeting other ships. So if we're in shipping lanes, generally you'll see the ships going the other way, passing down our port side. Now that said, that's not always the case, but that's the general rule that we try to strive for. Obviously things are going to change. And in certain areas we pass ships very closely, in other areas there's no need due to the sea room that we have. So at sea, in the middle of the ocean like we are right now, my standing orders is 2 miles. There's no need to get closer to anybody else closer than 2 miles. So we will adjust our courses accordingly. And if it requires the other vessel to make a course change for us, then we will communicate with them if we see that they're not. the rules of the road dictate who has the right of way based on which side they're on, and a few other factors. So that's all part of the way we do it.
The Oasis class has a ton of unique shows and entertainment on board. A lot of them are very motion and weather sensitive. How do you assist them in trying to ensure a show can go on?
Well, on the Oasis class ships and on Symphony, we have the Aqua Theater, and that is a very sensitive venue for ship's motion. So whenever there's a show in the Aqua Theater, we do our best to maintain as much of a stable platform as possible. It's not always possible, but when we do try to do it, we will extend the stabilizers. Even if you can hardly detect a roll down in the Aqua Theater, it will show itself as the pool is right up to the edge, and it'll slosh over if we don't. So first thing we do is put out the stabilizers, and if that is not enough, we can alter our course a certain amount, and we can slow down as well if we need to. But generally, it's enough with the stabilizers. And if it's not enough with the stabilizers, usually there's not too much we can do. So it is what it is. But usually we plan those shows early in the cruise so that if it doesn't work out, we have time to schedule them later in the cruise, and that's done quite often. But that's the venue that probably, that's the one that challenges us the most. The ice skating shows and the other shows that we do, they're sensitive, sure, but they're not that sensitive, and they can work quite well, even with a little bit of ship's motion. But this class of ship is very wide, very long, very big, and it doesn't move that much relative to other ships. And I've been on a lot of other ships, and they can move around a lot. But this class of ship is very stable. It's a very stable platform.
So now there's one thing that happens on this bridge that is probably more popular with the guests on board than anything else, and that is blowing that horn.
Yeah.
What kinds of rules and etiquette are there around the horn that prevent you from just laying on it continuously?
Well, I always try to think of what effect it's going to have on everybody who might be on the outer decks. Most people really like it and they think it's great, but I don't do it just for that reason. So there's a number of reasons why you will blow the horn or not. And sometimes on cruise ships you'll hear 3 long blasts. And that has no navigational meaning. It is an unwritten rule that it is a greeting for another vessel. So you'll hear the other vessel give 3 long, and we respond in kind, we give 3 long, and usually that's answered by a short little toot at the end. And it's an acknowledgement, it's a respectful way of saying hello. So that's one thing. Oftentimes when we depart port, 1 long blast signifies we are leaving. 3 short blasts means we are operating a stern propulsion. We're backing out of a slip, let's say. We're backing out of the pier. It lets other ships know what's happening. Some ports are very sensitive to this. They don't like ships' whistles being blasted. It disrupts the local population. They get tired of it, so we respect that and don't do it. So you know where those ports are, and I don't do it when we do. So, but it's a lot of fun to blow the whistle. It's my favorite part of the job.
So what is next for you?
I don't know. I will be assigned to Symphony for the foreseeable future, and I'm very happy with that. It's been a long journey to bring her into service. I feel very connected to her and the crew. And when I refer to the ship, I'm oftentimes referring to the crew because they are what makes Symphony what it is. Yeah. At the end of the day, a ship is just a steel hull. Granted, it has lots of amazing features, but it's the crew that makes it operate and gives it the personality it has and can determine its success. And on this ship, on this team, most everybody was handpicked. We've all been through a lot together, so we've built a very strong bond and connection to the ship. It's really, we feel a strong ownership of our home, of our ship, and that's why we call them guests. They're guests in our home, and we love to entertain our guests, of course, and I just enjoy the fact that I am here on Symphony, and I feel she's mine in a lot of ways, and I'm very happy and satisfied with that. So who knows what the future brings? We'll see. But usually we're assigned to a ship 3-4 years at a time, and such is the case with myself. Every ship has 2 captains. One's home on vacation, while the other one's here. And in my case, Captain Rick Sullivan's home on vacation, and when I sign off December 22nd, he will come and we'll have a handover for some hours, and then I will fly home. And we stay in communication throughout the period of time. So we're always sort of abreast of what's going on. You know, a large ship like this requires a lot of management and an understanding of what's happening on board, and there's so much happening all the time. To stay abreast of it is very helpful. So when you come back from vacation, you understand all that's been going on. So you have a clear way of hitting the ground running, so to speak. And it's very active here, and there's a lot to do. So that's our system of doing it. I work 10 weeks on, 10 weeks off.
Is there anything else you'd like to tell the viewers?
Well, I would just like to say that we hope you consider Symphony of the Seas. If you decide to take a cruise, I hope it's with us. I guarantee that you will enjoy this beautiful ship. It's an amazing ship. It's our newest ship. It's our largest ship in the world. But we like to think of it more as the greatest ship in the world, and that's what matters more. So we hope that's what you find when you come, and we hope you come.
Yeah. All right. Thanks for talking to me.
Nice meeting you.
So as always, got to thank Captain Rob for taking the time to sit down with me. Symphony of the Seas is an incredible ship. She's got so much power, and she shows it off every time she's in port, like today. And of course, Captain Rob is the one that is manning that and ensuring that everything is handled appropriately. And he'll have to do that again tomorrow, because tomorrow we are in Puerto Rico, bright and early. We have a 7 a.m. arrival. Hopefully that means we'll be passing the fort about 6 a.m. Try to get up early enough to catch that. They did not mention what time we'll pass the fort today at all, so I'm kind of guessing on that one, but hopefully I'll catch it in the morning. And that is a shorter day, only until 2, so we'll definitely see it as we depart. But for now, thanks for watching. I'm Picone, and stay tuned for the links.